Great. I think we have now reached time to start the session here late in the afternoon. So I will start by saying to welcome to all of you here who just got back from the afternoon break, even though it kind of feels like it's already evening. Maybe at least for some of those of you who are not used to being in the Arctic, but I guess most of you are quite used to this. But we will now start a session here, the fourth session on the first day. It is co-hosted. It's hosted by Nordic Energy Research, co-hosted by Nora. You will get to know both institutions here soon. But this session is titled Building Sustainable Energy Futures for Arctic Communities. And there's a great reason for why we have chosen to focus on sustainable energy within the Arctic. We are all well aware of the current geopolitical situation, marked by increased interest in the Arctic, first of all, but also influenced by the global energy crisis, driven by energy supply chains that crosses borders into countries in war. And as a result of this global energy crisis, we have come to recognize the critical importance of being self-sufficient on energy supplies as a cornerstone for building resilient societies for the future. And this also applies to the Arctic, where we have many remote communities that are reliant on fossil fuel imports today. And renewable energy can play a crucial role in accomplishing a self-sufficient and self-reliant future for Arctic communities, since renewables usually come from as a local resource. And the Arctic region, as most of you know, presents unique challenges, but also opportunities for sustainable energy development. Harsh climate conditions, a rich cultural heritage, high-risk investment landscapes, long distances requiring transportation by ship or plane in some parts, and abundant natural resources are factors that shape the Arctic. And in this session, we will explore solutions to overcome some of these challenges, but also to leverage some of the opportunities for driving a sustainable energy transition. And before introducing you to 5 esteemed speakers I've invited here, brought along with me today, because they're best at answering some of the questions I have for them today, I would like to just highlight that this session today builds on a network which is facilitated by Nordic Energy Research. It's called the Net Zero Island Network, and I'm the one responsible for it. So if you have any questions or interested, I have a postcard, so you can easily take with you home the information. But this network is a network that has been facilitated since 2020. In this network, we gather local energy experts from islands and remote areas in the Nordic countries, in Scotland, Ireland, and Canada, with the overall aim to share knowledge, create new knowledge, as well with the overall aim to accelerate the green transition of these areas, which is quite crucial because we see a lot of similarities among these areas. And if we go together, we could build the critical mass for accelerating the future into having green energy. So that was a bit about us. And then I will just say that Nordic Energy Research is the Nordic institution of joint energy research and research-based policy development under the Nordic Council of Ministers. Yes, but I have brought along with me 5, I will say, excellent speakers. So now I'm putting a pressure on you, I know that, but I think that's actually fair to say. And I have invited these 5 speakers because they can all elaborate on specific projects in the Arctic, but also in the north circumpolar areas from different perspectives on how we build a sustainable energy future for their respective areas. So they will both embrace some technical, economic, and social solutions. So you should be, I think, excited for the presentations here today. So now I'm thrilled, first of all, to present to you the speakers we will have, and you will see them all on stage soon. But our first speaker will be Kjell Gjever. Kjell Gjever is the CEO of Arctic Energy Partners, sitting here in front, and also chairman of the energy cluster Energi i Nord. Gjever has significant experience in the energy sector and has an in-depth understanding of Northern Norway. He has been director of Arctic Energy Partners for 10 years and lives in Bodø. So I will just say he is a local ambassador here for this session. Our second speaker is Dr. Greg Polzer. with whom I had the privilege to meet here in October at Arctic Energy Forum in Iceland. And Greg is a professor in the School of Environment and Sustainability and co-lead of the Energy and Mineral Resources for Sustainable Future signature area of the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. And over the past 30 years, Greg has developed deep connections with industry, government, NGOs, and indigenous communities in Canada and across the circumpolar north. His research focuses on renewable energy, indigenous state relations, and economic development. And then we have our third speaker, which is Ms. Halla Nolsø Poulsen. And Halla Poulsen is the director of the Nordic Atlantic Cooperation, also our co-host for this session, and a part of the Nordic family. And Nora, which is also called, is located in the Faroe Island. Halla has previously been head of the Faroese representation in Iceland, with a demonstrated history of working in international and diplomatic affairs. She has a strong expertise in community and social services and is skilled in international relations, public administration, political science, politics, and policy analysis. Additionally, she's also the chair of the Faroese Gender Equality Committee. To our fourth speaker, Tom Wills. He is a director of WAR, which is an energy consultancy company based on the Shetland Islands, where he's also born and raised himself. And WAR provides technical consultancy services to clean energy developers, both in Shetland but also internationally. And Tom himself has extensive expertise or experience in consultancy across the world, specifically on coastal and offshore energy, which includes tidal and wind. But however, his work also extends beyond technical studies to include a focus on social aspects of the renewable energy transition, particularly focusing on building community ownership, which we will elaborate on here later today. And then to our final speaker, also all the way from Canada, Dr. Michael Russ. And Michael Russ is the Industrial Research Chair in Northern Energy Innovation at the Yukon University in Canada. He holds a PhD in electrical engineering from McGill University, and his applied research program, the Northern Energy Innovation, addresses the needs and solutions for integrating renewable energy for northern and indigenous communities in partnership with the communities themselves and utility companies. So building a bridge between research, communities, and utilities. And the program focuses on all three territories of Canada, the Northern Territories, which is Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And then finally, my name is Dita Stiegler, and I'm an advisor at Nordic Energy Research, and I will be guiding you through this session as the moderator. But then let's get to it. That was enough for the introduction. So I will now like to invite our first speaker to elaborate on how he contributes to building sustainable energy future here in Northern Norway. So please, Mr. Kjell Gjever, come up on here on stage, and it's time for your presentation. Yes. And you just click on the green button when you want. Yes.
But now that's the slide you see.
No, actually, I cannot see this. Yeah, now it's the slide.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Thank you, Dita, and thank you to the organizers for inviting Arctic Energy Partners. I'm really looking forward for my short speech about the energy transition in the northern part of Norway. I was actually going to start with a practical joke because Greg is here, but since not all of you know him, I will leave it to that. My name is Kjell Gjever, and I'm actually the 12th generation of Gjever in North Norway. All of our generations have been working with stockfish, so have I. But now, for the last 30, 40 years, I've been working into energy. Before I give a presentation of what we do in Arctic Energy Partners, I will give some topics about the complex energy situation, and especially related to the northern part of Norway. In all the lessons today, you probably have started with Trump. And I'm not going to start with Trump, but I'm going to start because when we talk about Europe, this is listed up as one of the main problems coming up. How will this affect? But Europe is in much bigger trouble than Mr. Trump. And Europe's big problem is energy. It's the industry in Europe now, especially the energy-intensive industry, is facing I would say, an Armageddon. And the way and why they are facing it is because they pay very high prices on energy. So a lot of industry, very important industry, for example, car industry, is moving out of Europe elsewhere. And why is I starting with that? It's because this part of the Arctic is a mega region in energy. We are among the largest energy exporter related to, of course, fossil fuel, but we're also one of the largest region in Europe into renewables. And what we're doing today is exporting most of it. And that gives us a lot of interest, because then we have a lot of friends, but it doesn't create all the ripple effects that we want to use the energy for. So now when we're into the energy transition, we have to do both. We have to be a stable energy supplier to Europe, but also find business opportunities for the energy in the Arctic. And I'll also give an example later of this city, because this city has a goal to going to net zero. But I'll give one example how complicated that is. North Norway is also one of the largest CO2 emitters in Europe per capita. Listen to that. We are also one of the largest CO2 emitters related to CO2. And of course, everyone says, yes, of course, they are a big oil producer. No, no, no. That's not the answer. The answer is that we are very few people, but we have 5 or 6 large industries like melters. Of course, they go on renewable, but they use coal to produce iron and aluminium. So we are also one of the largest CO2 emitters per capita in Europe and Norway. And I can assure you, we will also be among the first in Europe reaching the Paris goal. And that's exactly because we are few people, so the public emission is very low. It's very difficult to solve, but it's much easier since we have few but large emitters to take down this emission. So be aware, the Norwegian part of Arctic will be among the first regions worldwide reaching the Paris goal. So, what do we in Arctic Energy Partners do? And I have highlighted some of our achievements. We have, of course, been working a very, very long time related to oil and gas and ripple effects from that. But the last 3 and 4 years, we are also the leading network related to the energy transition and the renewables. So we see the only way going forward, bringing this into net zero or low carbon, is doing both. Even thinking only doing one thing would stop this. I know this is provocative to say that, but the only way forward is doing both. But why do I stand up every morning? It's the first issue. It's creating ripple effects to the local industry and the local society. So we're very proud of being able to include the local industry in deliveries to the energy projects. We are also very proud that we have built clusters so we can compete with industry worldwide when we have energy projects in the north. So we have over time built local businesses that can compete with companies from US, from France, from UK, or south in Norway. And we are also proud that we have been a part of bringing North Norway into what I say, a mega region producing energy. And finally, a lot of the big new project into turning the energy system into low carbon is happening in this region. The largest carbon capture facility related to volume is now in the Arctic. It's in the Barents Sea in Europe. Storage to up to 800,000 tons of CO2 each year. We have proven, and I would say for the rest of the world, that electric cars in the Arctic, it's no problem. 90% of all cars sold now, light vehicles in the Arctic here, is electrical. The most modern fleet of low carbon worldwide, if you look into number of ships, is in the region. Of course, the oil and gas offshore vessels is driving this transition because they have cash, they can have modern fleet. And I can go on and on with hydrogen ferries, electric ferries, producing biogas from waste. But I will end my speech by an example from this city and how complex the energy transition is. Because the biggest emitter in this city is a waste burning plant. It emits about 40,000 tons of CO2 each year. For some years ago, this waste was put into trucks and drove to south of Sweden and south of Finland and burned there. So to both make business and heat and to cut down the total emission, they build a plant in Tromsø. But now this plant is facing to be closed down because you have a local initiative of how to get to net zero. And that's not the way we can count it. Because we can't go back to driving the waste again down to south of Sweden and burning it there and then lift yourself and says, yes, we are net zero. Because exactly that is what's going to happen. We have to think broader than that. Thank you. I'm looking forward for the debate.
Perfect. Thank you. Always a good idea to present a concrete example. So thank you very much, Kjeld, on that note. So we will just go on to the next speaker. Greg Polsher, please join me here on stage. We will skip through the slides here, and then I think it will appear here soon. Yeah, great. Yes, we see it.
Okay, perfect. So I'm gonna, I come from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, in the western part of Canada. And I know I've been working now in the Nordic countries since, about 25 years now. Used to do a lot of work in Russia as well. But one of the I'm going to tell a story that Kjell and I were on a panel together in Brussels, because the Nordics, Norwegians, Swedes, even Finns have trouble saying Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and you can see how it's spelled. And it's my mom told me, and Kjell remembers this, it was at the airport in Minneapolis, and there's January, and there's a couple, husband and wife, and they're dressed in almost like Hawaiian kind of clothes, which is strange when it's cold in the middle of January in the airport. So this Minnesota couple, they were there in Minneapolis, the wife says to husband, go ask where these people are from. He says, I don't want to ask them, those are strangers. He says, no, go ask them, go ask them. She says, no. This goes on for about 5 minutes. Finally, the husband gives in. He saunters over and says, sorry, I don't mean to be intrusive, but my wife and I were just wondering where you folks from. And the other husband says, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So he saunters back to his wife, and she's all excited. So what did they say? Where are they from? Goes, I don't know. They don't speak English, but that's the part of the world I'm from here, and again, a huge thank you to Dita for pulling us together for this pretty important topic. And I'm going to shift a little bit when talking about our cases partnership from the bigger scale that Kjell's talking about to from a different vantage point of scale at local communities, especially smaller, more remote communities and Indigenous communities. In this cases partnership involves Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Alaska, and we have 17 communities we're working across those countries, and we're technology agnostic. In kind of this approach Kjell's talking about, being evidence-based kind of approach, and looking what are the best options for communities without coming in with a pre-agenda, and taking from a bottom-up approach. Let's see here. How the hell is this?
So the large green box.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. So this is the part of the world that we're looking at, and this is a map that my colleague Gwen Holdman from the Alaska Center for Energy and Power and some folks of ours at University of Saskatchewan we put together, looking at, this was looking at the off-grid communities. And if you look from an Arctic perspective down onto the Earth, and what you see on here is the red dots are remote communities, so not grid tied in any way. And you see the darker gray is the regional grids, so they're not connected to continental grids, and the light gray is the continental grids across North America and Europe. And you'll see that most of the Nordic region, we'd make our new map a little bit of a difference in Norway, tweaking a little bit in terms of how we're defining what we're going to be calling the electric north. But you can see quite a difference across this part of the world as compared to the rest of the world. And so our mission of CASES, this partnership of academic institutions, utilities, Indigenous communities, northern municipalities, and engineering companies that are actually working in this space, is to co-create, as you can read, and share knowledge, understanding, capacity to design, implement, and manage energy systems that support and enhance social and economic values. And this builds exactly off the point that Kjell's making. And if there's one lesson, you're going to see it later, is getting beyond this idea of just price per kilowatt hour. Just the narrow fiscal or financial ROI on physical capital. And what can you leverage in terms of socioeconomic value, especially for communities. One of the things that we've done is a lot of training, and including at the graduate level and postdocs, masters, PhD, and postdoctoral fellows. And through this network over the last 5 years, we've had over 70 graduates, including folks from Gwich'in Tribal Council. We actually have one of our PhD students is from Galena, Alaska, and we'll have Koyukon student joining one of our energy security programs. In the much better dressed, and obviously that'll be obvious, the much better looking Michael Ross, who'll be talking soon. He's one of our important instructors and supporters of that program, and he deserves a lot of credit for capacity that's been built through there. 60% of our grads have been women and 20% Indigenous. So this has been very, very important part, working together. And that program that was built, this energy security program, is one of the programs we deliver, was built bottom up, blank piece of paper, Indigenous partners in industry, et cetera, to build what would be meeting the needs so you could have community energy champions trained without leaving the North to lead projects in their communities in the North. Okay. And this is the whole point. Energy is more than it's about infrastructure and technology. Fundamentally, energy, it's about communities, and that's been core to the whole CASIS project. So there's 4 considerations. You asked me to chat a bit what kind of the lessons, so here's 4. One is this notion of the value proposition about enhancing energy security, as well as creating socio-economic value. So not just narrowly, how do you do that? Second is this notion, idea about economies of scope, which is creating that kind of specialization of energy development as an economy. And they've done that in the automotive industry in Europe. When you think of Germany, Italy, et cetera, there's no reason the Arctic, in parts of the Arctic are already doing that, but we can do even more. The notion of energy sovereignty, so ownership at the local level absolutely can work. And finally, a very important lesson coming out of the work we've done in CASIS is around pooled resources. So the value proposition, this is just to paint a picture of the different ways energy intersects and thinking of it as a whole system of community economic activities, whether it's a local fish plant or in this case it's waste heat used for a greenhouse in Alaska, biomass in supporting, say, dimensional lumber when you're looking at biomass. But thinking about these, not just the price per kilowatt hour. And so when you think about this, did I mention getting beyond the price of kilowatt hour? This is one thing I always absolutely drive home. It is using this new opportunity that we have, especially in northern communities, of renewable energy, other forms of energy, sustainable energy that creates long-term sustainable economic opportunities. Because energy systems are always there. Mining, yes, we need mining, but mining comes and goes. It goes boom, bust. But energy in terms of service provision at a community level is there for the long haul. And this is where you can strengthen economic activities and social capital. So I'll give you one example, Galena, Alaska. Tim Kalki, our PhD student who runs Sustainable Energy Galena, Alaska. They've got biomass that they're using to heat a school, locally harvested. It's a community of about 500 people, 2/3 of which are Koyukon Alaskans. But guess what? When you have to build a road through the local forest to harvest it, it opens up access. So people who are berry picking, mushroom gathering, moose hunting, have additional access to healthy food, traditional economic pursuits, because it's working synergistically. You also have that during this summer. They're starting to build homes, assembling and doing home building with the same crews that harvest in the winter, transferable skills, adding more value added at the community. But if you had started at what was simply the cheapest form of energy, that might have not been the solution. But when you look at it as a whole economy, it opens up a world of possibilities. Economies of scope, we're seeing that that's this one here, I think this one is in the Klavik in terms of storage for pellets for biomass. But this comes back to this whole case around economies of scope and the opportunity to create regional supply chains, but also diversification of expertise from Norway to Greenland to the Yukon to Alaska, in how we can build that. And here is the great opportunity we haven't seized yet. Nearly 1 billion people, that number is falling, do not currently have access to electricity services globally. And whether it's in a place like Nepal, places like southern Chile, the Chiloé area, etc., there's places like that that have either poor energy services or no energy services at all. Do I have a couple more minutes or not?
Oh, yeah, it's red, but
Okay. They won't cut me off here right away. So, point is this. The expertise that we're learning, and you're absolutely right, on the bigger scale energy where the Arctic is leading, it's also leading at the small, remote community scale. That knowledge pooled together can be exported for greater humanity. And I don't mean to be glib about that. I'm dead serious in improving a lot of hundreds of millions of people on this globe that are going to want and need and deserve energy services. And that's something that the Arctic can play a leadership role if we think in terms of economies of scope. Energy sovereignty, I'll do this one real quick. The point is, people always worry around decentralization, certainly in Canada, about Indigenous ownership of projects. And this is new-ish. In places like Alaska, since 1967, like the Alaska Village Electric Cooperative, highly successful operating Native Alaskan-owned, locally owned energy systems. I always like to tease folks in Canada and say one day I hope Canada can be as forward-thinking as Sarah Palin's Alaska. And the final point is around pooled resources. Here's another Alaska lesson. How do you overcome not just production costs, trying to deal with economy of scale issues, but transaction costs? Negotiating, the ability to successfully negotiate lower fuel prices and being able to barge those in. Having small community on its own cannot hire or own or hire and maintain, say, a technician full time. But if you pool that resource around several communities, you can do that. And overcoming those kind of transaction costs and production costs, we're seeing that happen in the Arctic, something deadly important that we should spread across the Arctic and further globally. So these are some of the lessons, the last one. And then the last page is some of our partners, and I'm 2 minutes over, sorry.
Perfect. Well,
Okay.
okay. Yeah, thank you, Greg.
Yeah, you betcha.
No, that was perfect, Greg. Thank you very much for opening our minds to maybe looking beyond business as usual when it comes to investing in renewable energy for Arctic communities. So now I will lead the work on. We will now move to the Faroe Islands. So staying here to the north, Halla Nolsøe-Poulsen, please join me here on stage to explain some of the projects NORA funded in Faroe Islands and energy.
Yes, thank you. Do I have sound? No? Yeah? There we go. Okay, thank you so much. So I'm Halla Nolsøe-Poulsen. I'm the director of NORA, Nordic Atlantic Corporation, and I'm very happy to be here and co-host this event with you. I wanted to just explain a little bit about NORA because you may not know of us. My predecessor, the director before me, Åsmundur Gudjonsson, he was a driving force behind setting up the Net Zero Islands network. So that's the reason why I'm here. It's to showcase some of the examples of what has been done with NORA somehow being involved on this topic. So I'm not an expert on energy or green energy or any of those things. I'm a generalist and I'm a director of this organization. So what is NORA? NORA is an organization under the Nordic Council of Ministers regional cooperation. We work within 3 pillars. We are project funding and agenda setting and alliance building organization. Our main task is to fund projects on issues that diversify the economies in the region. So our member countries are Faroe Islands, Greenland, Iceland, and coastal Norway. So all those communities, or what are they called, regional government level, fylke, what is that I don't know the English word for fylke, but those communities in Norway that border to the Atlantic Ocean. So that's what we have in common. We're working this. Our main task is to support projects. So while we do that, we also strive to meet trends and facilitate utilization of new and innovative ideas and so on in the region. We have actually strong ties to our neighboring countries to the west, the British Islands, Scottish Islands, as well as Canada and Maine. Yeah. So in regards to energy projects that Nora has been part of, in 2020, Denmark had the presidency of the Nordic Council of Ministers, and together with Faroese partners, they decided on 2 green energy projects to take place in the Faroe Islands. And then Nora was the administrative body to help them facilitate the projects. The first project was to do a test case with hydro storage in small scale. And the problem is that we have these wind energy, and there's a very difficulty to store the surplus energy. So they came up with as a test or a case to try and figure out how to be smart about this. So the solution that they wanted to test was to heat a water tank. And, to have a water tank, with water, and then they would use the surplus energy from the windmills to heat the water. And then the water tank was connected to the school and the elderly home in the little village of Lorvik in Faroe Islands. I'm just getting ahead of my notes here. It's a very simple idea, and it worked perfectly. So when the windmills were going and there was wind, they would heat up the water, and this amounted to being 37% of the time the surplus energy would go to heat the water. And then the heated water, I think I'm coming to, so the heated water ended up supplying the needs of the school and the elderly home with 70% of the time. So basically the surplus energy was in use 70% of the time, which was a very surprising result. This has been only going on for, I think it's about a year ago since they started collecting data from the experiment or from the case. So the picture shows that if they still had been using oil to heat the houses, that's the brown sort of scale, and then the green one is the one now in use with the water tank, and then they have a special pricing system also for that. So the municipality ended up saving 50,000 kroners a month just in the month of February. So this is a huge amount for a small municipality in a very small village. We have 29 municipalities in the country of 53,000 people, so it's very small scale. But that was a very interesting example of a case that shows that in a very rural area with no connection to other cheap energy prices, this was a way to work around that and be very smart with the surplus energy. So we only had you didn't start a timer, by the way. But that's fine. No problem for me, because I don't have. I'm okay. Yeah. So since we only could have these 5 slides, I don't have slides to the next project I want to mention. But this was another very fun project that Nora was involved with, and it goes back to 2002, when the Icelandic company of Marorka was fostering an innovative idea about how to save energy consumption in the marine industry. And this was long before we were talking about CO2 emissions and making everything green. And nobody believed in their idea, but they sort of somehow persuaded the Nora committee to support and fund this project. And their goal was very vital, very simple, to help ships use less fuel and cut down on harmful emissions. So they allowed ship owners to monitor how their vessels are running in real time, so they could have smarter decision making and save up to 10% fuel per ship. And they actually ended up winning the Nordic Council Environmental Prize in 2008. And they've since evolved into another very interesting project called SeaHub, which collects and analyzes large amounts of data and makes ship owners have better insight into the consumption and be more efficient. So they can actually save 15 to 20% in fuel. So this ambitious project wouldn't have been possible without support from Nora, because nobody sort of saw the value of the concept, and the Nora committee did. So they went global almost. I think they registered on NASDAQ, and the results speak for themselves. It is now a game changer in making shipping more sustainable. And the knowledge gained has spread across the Nordic region. So the entire marine sector has benefited from these inventions. So this is just another example of how small-scale projects and the very small means that Nora has to work with, even those can contribute to the green transition in our region and on a global scale. So thank you for listening. Oh, I forgot that one.
Thank you very much, Hadla. So for sure, this was very insightful, and I can just encourage you, if you want to know more about Nora, to reach out to Hadla, because they have funded several projects, not just in energy, but also in other topics. And exactly, I think this point mentioning that even on small scale, we can make a change or have an impact on a larger scale. So thank you very much for that. Then that leads us a bit further south to the Shetland Islands. So please, Tom Wills, if you will join me here on stage to explain about your work.
Thank you. It's working. So that's 2.5 minutes left for me, yeah?
Exactly.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Ditte and Nordic Energy Research, for the invitation, and to Nora as well. It's very useful for us in Shetland to make these Nordic comparisons. They're not always flattering, because often you're doing things better in this part of the world, but always illuminating for us. I'm going to talk about some work that we've been doing in Scotland for the Just Transition Commission, which is a commission set up by the Scottish Government to advise Scottish Government ministers on how to make the energy transition fair. And we've used Shetland as a case study for that. So yeah, my name's Tom Wills. I'm one of the directors of VOR. We're an energy consultancy supporting onshore and offshore renewable projects, hydrogen, PTX. Most of the people in our team are engineers, and the majority of our work is still technical. But in recent years, we've been getting a lot of questions about the socioeconomics of projects, and through that, we've done a lot of work looking at how do you maximize the supply chain content from some of these projects that are coming. And even more recently, in the last sort of year or two, we've started looking at policy questions, and specifically this question of what is a fair deal for communities that are hosting some of these really massive energy projects that we're seeing. Shetland, for those of you who remember, sort of just to remind you, for those of you who are not remembering, it's not technically in the Arctic. I'm very glad that you allowed me to join this event, despite the fact that we're in the subarctic. It was part of the Kingdom of Denmark and Norway until about 400 years ago. It's 23,000 people, so about half what you have in Faroe. We've hosted some of the largest energy projects in the UK and indeed in Europe. The Sullomvo oil terminal, commissioned in the 70s, was one of the largest oil terminals in Europe. We also have the Shetland gas plant, which when it was being built was the largest construction project in the UK. And we now have the Viking Energy wind farm, which at 443 megawatts is not the largest wind farm in the UK by capacity, but it is the most productive, and that's a function of our wind resource. So we've hosted massive energy projects. Our economy has been boosted by them, but these projects and that industry have not solved some of the social problems which we see in Shetland and in the wider UK, which are maybe not such an issue in many Nordic regions. Half of working households in Shetland live below the minimum income standard. 1 in 6 children live in poverty, and we have the highest rates of fuel poverty in the country. So the question with this new industry and these massive investments that are coming is this new industry going to fix those social problems in a way that the old one didn't manage to? This graphic, I could do with pointing at it, but this shows the projects which are built and under development in Shetland at the moment. A couple of years ago, all that would have been on this graph is these 1, 2, 3 small dots, which was 2 local business-owned wind farms and 1 community-owned wind farm. Last year in 2024, the Viking Energy wind farm project that I mentioned went online. When that was originally proposed, it was going to be 50% community-owned. And if any of you are around afterwards, I can go into this. It's a longer story, but essentially it ended up being 0% community owned. It was developed as a wholly commercial project. It does pay community benefit payments, and I'll come on to that. We also have 3 more onshore wind farms. Those projects have secured subsidy from the UK government. The owner of those projects is the Norwegian government, which is a novel arrangement. The irony of our privatized system is that we privatized the entire energy sector, and then the governments of other countries bought it. So good for those countries, less good for our country. And then you have, coming down the line, you have some fairly large floating offshore wind projects, which are going to be built probably in the 2030s onwards. So if you sum all of that together, you're talking about 3.5 gigawatts of power, which is 70 times Shetland's electrical demand. Am I really on 5.5 minutes, or is that someone else's time? That's me. Cool. So this is the Viking Energy Wind Farm, 103 turbines. As I mentioned, there's another community-owned project in the north of Shetland. All of the revenues from this go into the local community. On a good year, that's £1-2+ million a year. This project, which is 100 times the size, pays about the same amount to the whole of Shetland. So you've got a community-owned project delivering the same amount as a project 100 times the size. And if that doesn't tell you the value of community energy, I'm not sure what does. I won't go into the details of this one, but this is basically the way that our electricity grid has evolved over time from being an isolated system to now being connected to the UK transmission grid, and then more and more infrastructure being built to connect these onshore and offshore projects and to supply electricity to the offshore industry. Because we're a long way from the centres of power demand and we have the world's best wind resource, there's a high degree of interest in hydrogen proposals. So the operators of Sullomvo Oil Terminal are planning a project there, a 50 megawatt green hydrogen project in the initial scale, and they're talking about making 1 million tons of green hydrogen per year when that comes to fruition, which is quite an ambitious target. I'll show you what that looks like in terms of power in a moment. Statkraft that we mentioned earlier, they're also there. They have a 400 megawatt green ammonia project, which is planned to scale to 1 gigawatt. So a few people in Shetland are talking about the freight train of energy developments. On this graph, you can see the Garth Community Wind Farm here. You can't actually see it because it's not big enough. The combined total of the community projects and the locally owned projects is not a pixel on this graph. You then have the Viking Energy project, which is now live. Statkraft coming online a few years later. The offshore projects, high degree of uncertainty as to when exactly they'll be built, but it gives you an idea of the scale. And even all of that stuff that's built in planning would not be enough to satisfy the hydrogen demand. So you can see in the green there what's coming. And also that, the fishing industry are obviously concerned about this, particularly in Shetland, where it's a fleet of locally owned vessels. The idea of some of the economic utility of an area of sea being transferred from a locally owned group of people to external shareholders is controversial, to say the least. And there's discussions going on at the moment around community benefit payments from these projects and compensation and disturbance payment, with that being, we distinguish between those. A community benefit is a way for you to share value from your project with the community, whereas compensation or disturbance payments are zero sum. You've had a loss and you're getting it compensated. So there's a huge amount of projects coming, and in Shetland we are fortunate that we do have a strong engineering supply chain. We've handled some of the biggest decommissioning jobs in Europe. This is a 14,000-ton structure coming ashore for demolition in Shetland. And we formed an alliance with 3 of the main Shetland engineering companies. Each of these 3 companies, Ocean Kinetics, Malakoff, and LEF, have got about 100 engineering and support staff in each company. So individually, they can't really bid for the sort of tier 1 contracts that you might be talking about with some of these major offshore wind contracts. But collectively, we believe that we can. And we want to make sure that the Shetland firms do more than make the sandwiches, which is what can happen when a big energy project happens in Shetland. The Shetland guys get called with the minor contracts or when something goes wrong, and we're trying to make sure that this local supply chain is baked in at the start to these projects. going to spend a bit more time on this slide. So we talk about talk about social value earlier, the kind of spectrum of social value. And at one end of the spectrum, you have ownership, full ownership of the project, and at the other end of the spectrum, you have kind of business as usual project development. So we're working across that spectrum. On the more business as usual end, we're working with the project developers to look at how they can maximize their local supply chain content by going beyond business as usual and basically calibrating their project assembly, installation, transport, and maintenance plans so that they can use as much of the local supply chain as possible. Then, community benefit, that's an established standard in the UK for onshore wind projects. Typically, an onshore wind project will pay £5,000 per megawatt capacity installed. In a windy place like Shetland, that's not so interesting because the fact, a wind turbine in Shetland is making twice as much power as one on the UK mainland, but you're getting the same level of community benefit. And often these developers have historically not linked those payments to the year in which the £5,000 per megawatt benchmark was first established. They start £5,000 per megawatt from project first power, which means if you're in 2024, instead of getting £7,300 per megawatt, you're getting £5,000 per megawatt in, depreciated by inflation. So I've got the two examples of Viking here. I've got Viking as originally envisaged and as it was built. That would have been transformational for the economy of Shetland, were we to be 50% owner of that project. It was a controversial project from the start among, a fairly vocal minority of people, but I would say probably a third of Shetland was maybe leaning towards being against it, a third of Shetland was for it, and a third of Shetland was probably, not too bothered or not paying attention. That was when it was 50% community owned. Now that it's 0% community owned and we have a community benefit regime, I'd say it's significantly less popular than that, and the prospect of further developments with the same business model is concerning, to say the least, for a lot of people. So through our work with the Just Transition Commission and some work that we're doing at the moment with regional and local authorities in Shetland, and also we're doing some work in Chile now at the moment, which is in some ways a more extreme example than Shetland on this spectrum. We're looking at, depending on the sector, depending on the project, depending on the leverage and the laws of the place that you're in, how do you maximize social value? And there's a number of dials that you can play with, whether it's supply chain, infrastructure, housing. In Shetland, often they bring in an accommodation barge to do the job and then they tow it away again. But meanwhile, we have a housing crisis and we need more houses. So can the local authority partner with the developer to build something that's going to last for the longer term? And at the end of the spectrum, the highest prize, if you can get it, and this is why the Faroe comparison is so unflattering, is 100% ownership of your own energy system. That ship has sailed in Shetland and in a number of other places, but there's still things that can be done to maximize that social value. This is my last slide. So just to recap, oil and gas did boost our economy, but many islanders in Shetland remain in poverty, and that's true of many other oil and gas communities around the world. The local government finances are also in decline. Local government in general in the UK has been eroded, and we need to basically look at how we can build community wealth for the future and make ourselves more resilient. The Scottish Government and the UK Government are now talking about supporting community energy, but the barriers to developing community energy have not yet been removed. The scale and pace of what's coming in Shetland, I feel like we're at the leading edge of this as a kind of, I guess, the crucible of it. There's a lot of things combining in a small population, but across the world, we need to get more renewable energy built. And you're seeing increasing amount of opposition. Even the rise of Trump, in some ways, is linked to some of this dynamics that are playing out around climate policy, and the fact that people perceive they're not getting a fair deal out of this sector. And to my mind, if you want to get the renewable energy capacity built that we need to get built, you're going to have to look at different models to do it. And there is an opportunity to develop projects that transform host communities for the better. We see that in Faroe. We see that in the project I showed you in the north end of Yell. We need to find a way for the social value from these projects to be retained. Otherwise, essentially, it's more extractivism. Thank you.
Tom, I knew it was quite a task for you to embrace the whole energy transition here and development in the Shetland Islands, but I think you did it very well. And just on a short notice, I know you say that you sometimes find that the projects you do in Shetland Islands are a bit less flattering as we see them in the Nordics. But to be fair, I think we should learn from all projects that are driving a change for the society in general when we talk about renewable energy. So thank you very much. I think it was an enlightening presentation. And that leads us to our final speaker, and that's you, Michael Ross. I have invited you for several hours presentation here this year because you are brilliant explaining. So please take the word is yours.
Can you hear me? It's all good? Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about is essentially, I'll give you a little bit of a perspective in northern Canada. So northern Canada comprises 3 territories, the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. And if you think about the scale of it, if the Canadian territories were a country, it would be the 7th largest country in the world. And our population is approximately twice of the city of Tromsø. So what that means is we have a population density less than the Sahara Desert by a factor of 10. So if you think about economies of scale, if you think about capacity, if you think about even the environmental considerations, those are very challenging problems that we face on a daily basis. I'll give a quick example of the energy context in Nunavut. And by the way, this is a direct quote from the local utility there, Quotient Energy Corporation. And this is the reality that they're facing. The table on the left shows that they have 25 isolated diesel communities whose main access is either plane or barge, or the sea lift. And it's all fossil fuel imported. And yet 11 of the 25 communities' diesel plants are past its design life cycle. It's hard to plan for your deck renovation when your kitchen is actively on fire. They're just trying to keep the lights on. They don't have a lot of capacity. The cost of electricity is very, very high, and they're all dependent on imported fossil fuels. So when we look at renewable energy projects and building more sustainable energy infrastructure, we have to think a bit about it from the utilities perspective. Now, a lot of the work that we do at Yukon University is focusing on addressing some of these challenges. So I'm not going to go through this, but understanding what it takes to keep the power system on and running. We have to look at the adequacy of the system, security, resilience, and safety. In an electric power system, power in has to equal power out at all times. Otherwise, we get voltage and frequency deviations. And if we get voltage and frequency deviations, if let's just say we plug in our computers, our laptops, our lights, everything that we have, it's expecting to see in Europe 50 hertz, 230 volts. Any deviation means that the frequency of the voltage will deviate, and I think the technical term for that is it's a bad situation. So when the utility can't control how we use electricity, and we add in more intermittent, uncontrollable resources, that becomes an even bigger problem for us to regulate. So this is where our program comes in. So Northern Energy Innovation is a research program out of Yukon University that is funded and directed by the electric power utilities across Northern Canada, as well as BC Hydro's non-integrated areas, to build some of those economies of scale and overlap with common challenges that are faced in the northern industry, the northern energy industry. And rather than us sit in our lab and think about what are some pretty cool research projects to pursue, every single project that we pursue has a direct impact on the North. And one of the benefits of being in the North is that we live the challenges that are faced on a daily basis. Now, one of the ways that we determine the program direction is we sit down and we ask the CEOs of the utilities, what keeps you up at night? And these kind of looks like sticky notes because they were sticky notes. And we categorize them into different program areas for us to pursue. So for example, integrating renewables and how that affects system stability and reliability. We're looking at the electrification of heat and transportation and the acceleration. Can our infrastructure actually handle that? We're also looking at grid modernization, so smart grids, microgrids, demand-side management, distributed energy resources, and how that could play a part in the energy transition. We also look at policy and outreach. Now, it's not driving policy. We're here to inform policy so that they can make better informed decisions, so that every policy is a responsible one. And then finally, business approaches. And when we say business approaches, the utility's prime mandate is to provide safe, reliable power in the cheapest way possible. But now, how do the utilities think more strategically around how do we take into consideration a lower carbon footprint or social responsibility in determining which capital infrastructure projects they should be pursuing? Now, for the sake of this presentation, I'm just going to be focusing on integration of renewables, but we do a few other things. Now, even though our program is directed by the utilities, it's driven by communities. We have been fortunate to partner with 14 different First Nation and Inuit communities on their renewable energy projects and energy initiatives. And when I say that we're fortunate to work on them, these aren't our projects. They truly are driven and led by the community. But it's our responsibility to build and foster the trust with the community in order to advance these projects. Now, when I think of trust, I think of it in two ways. Like, as an example, if you had to go for a surgery, you would ask your doctor what her opinion is because you trust that she's medically competent, she knows the best procedures, and based off of her rigor, she's able to do the best job for your surgery. But you also ask your friends, your family, your loved ones, not necessarily because they're technically competent, but because they have your best interest in mind. When we work with communities, we need to make sure that we are both those to those communities. And in order to do so, one of the things that we make sure that how we could ensure that we serve our communities is we ask, what does a successful project look like to you? Now, if you allow me to give a quick example, who here wants to have a higher salary? Only one person? So if your boss said, hey, we would give you a higher salary, everyone else would reject it? So who would like to have a higher salary in this room? Pretty much everyone. But I could guarantee you, it's not about the money. For some people, it might be higher purchasing power. For some people, it might be a higher socioeconomic class that it puts you in. For some people, it's to reduce the stress of not being able to afford things and living paycheck to paycheck. For some people, it's the financial security that you could retire and have a good quality of life. For some people, it puts you in a position to better support your family and your loved ones. It's not about the money. So whenever we work with communities, one thing I've found is whenever we ask communities, what does a successful project look like to you? It's not about the renewables. The renewables identify what is being done, but by identifying what a successful project looks like, we know why it's being done. And with that, the onus is on us to determine how we approach the project in order to maximize the success for the community. So the way we go about it is we position ourselves where the utilities fund and direct our research program, the utilities drive our research program, we are accountable to both. If the utilities have a technical concern of integrating renewables, we incorporate that in our studies and share that equally. If the communities have a vision and an objective that they want to integrate their renewables, which could be, I mean, Greg had a great presentation earlier outlining all the value propositions. It could be energy security. It could be building jobs so that families could be more prosperous within the community. It could be revenue streams so that the community itself is more prosperous. It could be reducing carbon emissions. Whatever it is, we include that and share that with everybody equally. But we are not, like I said, these aren't our projects. We support the projects in a way that the decision makers can make the responsible decision in their own best interest. So in the end, what we do is we essentially use 3 things to help advance sustainable communities. We utilize our expertise in electric power systems engineering to provide technical results so that responsible decisions can be made. We provide our experience, not just in living the challenges that are faced in the North and the unique context in the North, but also, I mean, in theory and practice are the same thing. In practice, they are not. The lessons learned from different communities we could bring to every other community so that it helps support a more successful project. And then finally, our position. We are a higher education institution. We are here for knowledge mobilization, and we are here to make sure that we are the trusted, unbiased source of information, so that way it builds trust with our industry, builds trust with our communities, and progress happens at the speed of trust. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Also to elaborate on what is a successful project for the communities in Northern Canada. I think that's very insightful. We are reaching this point now where I would like to gather all of the 5 of you up here on stage. So please join me here for some questions from the audience. I will definitely like to give you the word, also to stay a bit awake because I know it's getting a bit late here in the afternoon. Great, I will move on to the other side here. Great. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Great, but before I would like to give the word to you, I will start actually touching upon a question on collaboration, because I'm quite curious. Now you have heard from each other, from different areas. I will go down on stage because then you can see all of you. So then I would like to hear, because the topic of this year's Arctic Frontiers is Beyond Borders. And it makes me a bit curious, after you are now listening to each other's, do you have anything that comes in mind to you? Where should we collaborate across our countries and with our projects? Can you mention anything for building a sustainable future on energy for local communities? You are nodding a lot, so I'm actually looking at you, and I don't know if you need a microphone here, maybe if everyone can hear you then. Yeah.
Is it on?
It's on, yes.
Of course, when you mention collaboration across borders related to energy, the northern part of Europe and the Nordic countries is already collaborating a lot. Actually, there is more export and import of energy in this part of the region than it is in the between Denmark and Germany and the Benelux country. So we have a lot of energy transition, but we need more. And not many know that in this part of Norway, not exactly this, but in northern part of Norway, we have more renewable than we use. Each year, from our hydropower, we between 5 and 10 terawatts go straight into the sea. So collaboration between wind in Sweden and hydropower in Norway is a perfect combo for getting into more new industry and cutting emission.
Thank you. That was very concrete. That's wonderful. Nice. Hatla, you're also nodding, so I think, and then all of you will have the opportunity to say
Thank
something.
you. Yeah. So from a NORA perspective, that's what we do. We wouldn't fund projects if they weren't collaborations between at least 2 of our member countries, and then sometimes also neighbors to the west and so on. So definitely we need to work together. And as I, in my presentation, the focus on small scale being test cases that we then can scale up to the bigger countries. We are in the Faroe Islands. It's off the grid. We are a closed community with energy supply. We have one provider. It's government, or it's actually municipality owned. So the local communities have a say in how the developments are going and so on. So, but just learning by each other's examples, what to do and what not to do. I think we need to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, Greg, you're standing here with the microphone next to you. So yeah,
You betcha. No, I was pretty inspired by my colleagues' presentations in what we have to learn to share, because we have this. You've heard things at a community level, and then you've heard things at a utility level, and in some ways they're fundamentally different problems, but in other regards they're also scalable, and this makes this whole energy field very different than say extractive industries like mining or even oil and gas, where it's the capital requirements to be into the game. But this learning about these different models and experiences is so critically important. And it comes to your point, like Michael said about trust, but that got played out right across all. And I'm thinking of Shetlands. In this trust factor is so critically important, because you get it wrong on the front end in learning from these mistakes. You're hooped sometimes for generations. I have a colleague who works around this issue in Spain, and I remember him being in a class and explaining how critically important the word trust is, because he said trust is a little bit like virginity. Once you lose it, really tough to get back. But
thank you. On that note, we will lead on the microphone to the next one. Thank you very much, Greg. Nice. Tom, please, and then you can take it away.
This is maybe still working.
Oh yeah, I think
Is
so.
that working? Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're here, right, is to learn from our Nordic and Arctic and subarctic neighbors. And I didn't mention my presentation, but a colleague of mine, we founded a not-for-profit called Equitable Energy Research, and it's all about learning from the existing models. Because, I'm conscious this is a room of experts, right? But often these communities don't have the energy sector. I mean, I don't like to say energy sector literacy, because it sounds like you're saying they're illiterate, but it is. It's that sort of thing, like they don't have the knowledge, A, of the energy sector, and B, of what's possible. Part of the reason I'm so interested to come here and to other Nordic events is to be able to go home and say with confidence, like, this is totally possible. Those guys over there are doing it. And that's valuable for people working in the industry, but it's also valuable for people, living in these places who are not experts. And a slightly cheeky one at the end, because this came up in Åland Islands as well, some sort of comparative study supported by Nordic Energy Research, where we can actually compare in detail some of these models. Because within the network and within NORA, I'm sure as well, it's almost like there's a toolkit of options, and a lot of people are sitting with their, particularly in Shetland, I think sometimes with the blinkers on, thinking, we can't do this because it's not being done elsewhere, but actually it is in other places that are not so far away and not so different.
Thank you. I think you highlighted a very important point here, and it also summarizes some of the other things that's being echoed here. So, and thank you for adding more work to me as well, reminding me of that. So thank you very much. But I think it's important. So, Michael, yeah.
There's an expression: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And in a lot of ways, what we're trying to do is we are trying to grow our society in a way that's far and sustainable for everybody. And I'm pretty sure I'm not just speaking for myself, but I mean, if you see us, we're open to collaboration amongst each other and with everybody. Myself, collaborating with Greg at University of Saskatchewan has been huge for us. Even Shardul with University of Toronto, we're very open for collaboration, and in a lot of ways, not building up on what everyone says. It isn't just a learning from each other's experience, but we all have our own unique expertise and experience. And if you think about, if as an analogy with a car, some of us might be an expert in engines, some of us might be an expert in, seating, steering wheel, doors, whatever. Individually, there's only so much you could do. But through the synergies, we could create something greater than the sum of our parts and actually get somewhere.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. Great. So now I would actually like to give the opportunity to you. So if there's anyone who has a question, yes, perfect. I can see a selection, but we will start down here from the end. Yes. And please, if you want to, please stand up or at least say where you're from and your name. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erica. I'm an Arctic policy analyst in the Canadian government. And first of all, thank you. This was super interesting. And kind of on the same, I guess, topic of collaboration. Obviously, the Canadian Arctic has many infrastructure gaps, not just energy, but I guess my question is, how can everyone work together, as we were just kind of talking about, to prevent companies and countries who may be coming in for other reasons than just, than what we're here for, and continue to maintain that community-based approach?
Thank you very much. So touching a bit upon tenders, tender prices, investments, and so, if any of you want to say something here? Yeah, Kjell? Please.
Thank you for a good
Oh, yeah,
question,
thank you.
because this is really into the issue, because these new energy projects and infrastructure projects are they need a lot of cash. They are very expensive, and they are not as profitable yet as other projects. So if you look into our part of the Arctic, we are totally reliable on thinking internationally to get these projects financed. And we have a very rich state, so they are, of course, a part of it, but it needs to be a mix of investment. And then it comes to how can we, the government, make rules so that we own the resources and we benefit from them. But we are totally, we need also cash from all over the world, billions of cash.
Yes, thank you. Michael, yeah, please.
Can I
Oh, yeah.
Please go first.
Yeah,
Oh,
great.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's this question of the balance of power, and in some ways it's a political question, right? Like, who benefits from the resources of the place? Whose resources are they? I also think that increasingly this question is going to be picked up by things like ESG and investment funds as well, because the scale of what's needed, we're really still in the flat bit of the curve of the global growth of renewables, and it's already really controversial. So we often speak about, we imagine it as a triangle, the balance of interest. So you have the community, the developer, and the government or wider society, and you want to find some sort of balance point in the middle. And where that balance point is going to be different if you're in Norway or Chile or the UK. But there needs to be balance, and usually it needs to be dragged in the direction of the community, and sometimes it might need to get dragged in another direction. But I think on the one hand it's a political question, but increasingly it's going to be a question of environmental social governance and investment. We already have established this idea that you need to be, pension funds are asking for investments to be green, and they're making sure that you're not doing, that the diversity side of things is okay, and that you're not, doing a Coca-Cola and funding death squads or something. But, there's also this question of, like, are you delivering social value to the place that you're operating in, which I think is just going to become a hotter and hotter topic. Sorry for jumping the queue.
Oh, no. Yeah, so what I would say is really focus on what problem you're trying to solve and whose problem you're trying to solve. In terms of if you want to support a specific project, is it the developer's problem? Is it the community's problem? Really identifying clearly, lay that out, but also think about the framework of what is the legacy of the project. And I'll give an example. So the hamlet of Pawatuck is sitting on a rare earth mineral deposit that's supposedly 4 times richer than Sudbury, and if you're from Canada, that's a big deal. But they see a 100-year mine as short-term benefits. not in terms of the long-term sustainability of how it benefits the community. That doesn't build wealth for the community. And so really having your finger on the pulse as to what the needs are for the community, and I think Greg's presentation did a fantastic job of outlining those different value propositions and those different value chains to identify how the specific project could feed into the legacy of the project and the legacy for the community. Because 100 years from now, we'll all be retired or gone, but the community will still be there.
Thank you, Michael. And then you, Greg, you can have the final word on this question.
Yeah, and this is a really important question where we're going, especially when with outside investment. In one of the striking things, I'll give 3 quick models where we're seeing in Canada. Forestry sector, so that it's not energy, but it has important parallels. Across Canada, the forestry sector labor force is about 5% Indigenous. In Saskatchewan, in the commercial forestry belt, all the government about 18 years ago started turning over all the timber forest leases in the Saskatchewan's timber belt to First Nations ownership of those of the leases. The workforce is 30%. That's 6 times, 600% greater than the Canadian norm. And on top of it, it is managed around community values of go and no-go zones. So you can, so this ownership, I come back to the point around energy sovereignty. We're seeing examples of that. Same thing in Saskatchewan. We see this played out elsewhere. We have a tale of 2 provinces. In the south, there's been almost no Indigenous until recently engagement in the potash industry, and Saskatchewan's one of the world's largest potash producers. Uranium mining and gold mining in northern Saskatchewan radically different. To Shell's point, governments can make rules that change. And when they had requirements around surface lease agreements, in a population that's area of Saskatchewan, Northern Administration District, it's the jurisdiction with the highest Indigenous population in Canada, 86%. 39,000 people over a territory 2/3 the size of Sweden. Over the last 2 decades, they've done over $3 billion worth of procurement of goods and services with Indigenous companies. There's a better way. Then you look at the utility sector. One of the things that was set up was First Nations Power Authority and having carve-out. So when there's actually utility scale, it's owned and operated by First Nations. On the generation side, they're not just IPPs, independent power producers, they're IIPPs, Indigenous independent power producers. At Attawapiskat, the transmission line, Indigenous owned. And again, and when I look at some of the difficulties we're seeing in northern Norway and northern Sweden about green and it being perceived as an extractive industry potentially, and even hydro transmission line expansion. Again, it comes back on the community model. We know these are these models. So if we are collaborating and we're sharing that knowledge of what is possible on the ground, because it does already exist on the ground, we can make some headway.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I could see there were 2 more questions here among the audience. I think you had your hand up before as well, so please, if you have. No, if it's okay, because we have had a question here. I don't think you could see it down there, so that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Lulia. I'm a researcher at the Presidential Court of Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. And even though we're not a polar country, I think we have a similar environment where we're extreme opposite of a desert country. So my country as well is leaning towards more sustainable sources of energy, with IRENA being headquartered in Abu Dhabi, net zero emissions by 2050, et cetera, et cetera. So I guess this is, and we do have some sort of, I don't want to say indigenous communities, but communities that live in remote areas of the desert known as Bedouins. They're not really nomads, but I'm sure you're aware of the cultural background. So my question is kind of out of curiosity. Have you experienced, in your experience, any resistance or key challenges with these communities, transitioning into a more green energy? How has that been in terms of protecting their ways or protecting their communities kind of when making such a transition? I hope that was a clear question.
Yes, thank you very much. Michael, you have a hand up here for this?
Not every community prioritizes energy as the biggest thing. We all have things on our to-do list And does that mean we get everything done? No, we need to prioritize. Some communities, housing is the biggest issue. Some communities, health is the biggest issue. So there are some communities that have resistance, not because a clean energy future isn't important. In fact, a clean energy future aligns with many indigenous values, but it might not be the priority. And also identifying how the project is being implemented could help identify those value streams to identify why the community wants to pursue that. Because say, for example, there's a solar project implemented in a community. If it's 100% developer owned from outside, and it's more of an extractive project where it's using the local land, but none of the value streams are being kept by the community, that's not high on the priority scale for the community. But if that same solar project was owned by the community, kind of what Tom was saying, and those value streams can be met by the community, fed into the community, that aligns with the community's values and worldviews, then that becomes higher on the priority.
Thank you. Yes, Kjell, you had one, and then Tom and Greg as well. Yeah, Hadle and Phil. Great. So short answers because we're running a bit out of time.
Thank you for a good
No.
question.
Yeah.
Of course, in northern part of Norway, and especially Finnmark County, the Sami people is a vital part of this energy transition. And of course, their interest will, whatever you do, there will be less ground for their activity related to the energy. And in Norway, and we have enough energy for what we are now. But if we are going into a complete energy transition, we need more energy. So that's a very, very big issue. That's why the government, one of the things they have done, that's giving veto for the local communities, the local democracy. If they say no, the state cannot go further on building, especially wind farms. And we have the fisheries, who also have their interest in the sea, of course. And now Norway is building up very large-scale offshore wind. This is also a conflict coming up, as it has been related to oil and gas. So this is not solved. This is really big issues in Norway, how to make a way forward. So these, the Sami people and the fisheries, and the interest related to the nature can be in the forefront.
Thank you. Tom or Greg? Yeah, Tom. We will take Tom, then Hadle, and then Greg at the end.
This is working, yeah. Yeah, it's less an indigenous issue where I am, but like, you know, there's a local community, there's a host community there. And just to back up what was said previously, it's not about energy. You know, it's about having a warm home that you can afford to heat. Or what we've done in Indonesia, it's about having access to ice or to some kind of refrigeration so that you can get your product to market and preserve its quality. So it's linking the energy sector to the actual, you know, demands or requirements that people have. That's on the one hand. The other side of things is just this point I touched on very briefly before, which is the scale of areas that are required to get the same amount of power. You know, you need 50 square kilometers to get 1 terawatt hour of onshore wind power built. It's a bit less than that for solar, but you know, that it's like 0.01 square kilometers to get the equivalent amount of power from like a gas or a nuclear station. So you're talking about a much more diffuse energy source. And when it comes to something like that, you know, it comes back to fairness. It's like, you know, how much land is being taken and what are the people living in the vicinity getting out of it?
Thank you. Good point as well. Hadle.
Yeah. Is this on or is this one? No? Yeah. So it's the same in the Faroe Islands. It's not, we can't talk about an indigenous population, but we are a local population. And there is, I wouldn't say resistance, but I think maybe not a conscious, it's not a thing. It's not an issue, I think, transitioning. We have a little bit of resistance against windmills because it doesn't look good, and electric cars is going very, very slow to transition into. I mean, we have maybe 1,000 kilometers total roads. I mean, if not in those circumstances, when you know that electric cars in the Arctic are fine, no problem. There are too few charging stations. I have an electric car, and it's a hassle sometimes. If I go to a remote island, there will be very limited possibilities to charge, so it's like I can't go anywhere. But there is no push for implementing, well, not enough push, I think, and that's something that we need to work on, the change of the mind of the people. That's our greatest challenge, I think.
Thank you. And Greg, finally.
Just one point in this is I'm glad you raised this because it gets beyond this notion of Arctic exceptionalism. The problems that we're discussing are not unique to the Arctic, and there's a lot the Arctic can share with and teach the rest of the world, and there's a lot of things that the rest of the world can share and teach the Arctic, and so I'm very grateful the way you framed that question.
Thank you very much. So I can see that now we have exactly run out of time. So I'd like to summarize, and my initial idea was to give you an opportunity to highlight one key thing you'll bring with you home. But I think actually for having a break for half an hour, I will just summarize and say, thank you very much for all of you. I think some of the key points I will at least take with me today home is that it's nice and it's exciting to see all the projects that are going on, all the focus there is on renewables, but also on the social impacts of local societies. And definitely there are a lot of opportunities for collaboration, especially on sharing models for the development of renewables and to accelerate a transition that also favors businesses and the local communities. So thank you very much. And on behalf of Nordic Energy Research and NORA, we really like to thank all of you among the audience. If you have any questions, please come up, ask the questions. We will be available. We'd like the discussions to go on the next couple of days. And then finally, I will say, I wish you a splendid days here in beautiful Tromsø. So thank you very much. Nice. Good.